Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is April 29th, 2015. The Impact Letter webinar is one that I've been meaning to do for some time now because I think some of our ideas have evolved since the 5 or 6 years ago that we did this webinar. And I think mostly it's because I've seen how our students and our clients have received them in the field. So I'd like to add some new angles, some new perspective on what it means to write an impact letter and how we write an impact letter and where we come from when we write it. I'm also going to add a couple of pieces about receiving your impact letter, which we hope at Evoke is an opportunity that all students and clients experience and that all parents experience. I can think of no more important letter perhaps than the impact letter that they can eventually write to you because I think it demonstrates more than anything, actually, ironically, accountability. Because when you write an impact letter as a child to your parents, if you write it well, you write it from the perspective of here's what I'm upset about, but without blame and with still holding on to your own accountability. So I'll get to that later on in the webinar. But let's start off with the guidelines for the impact letter that you will write to your child, to your student at the beginning of the program. Also talking about principles that relate to writing any kind of or discussing any kind of content that's around confrontation. A lot of this comes from, or is at least crystallized in one story that I want to tell that I've told in passing during a few of the webinars, and that is this story. I was sitting out in the field a summer or two ago in a girls group. I was participating in an impact letter group along with the lead therapist, and I was listening to a young woman read her impact letter from her parents, and the stories were tragic and some of the most heart wrenching that you would ever imagine. Some of you could probably relate to them, unfortunately, but it was stories of suicidality and self-harm and drug abuse at the most severe level that led to and was around some of the most unhealthy and scary behavior in this young woman. There was prostitution, there was stealing from family, there was hurting other people. So just it ran the gamut, or at least it was a very rich experience that talked about the tragedy that this young girl had lived through. So after she read her mother and her father's letter, she sat there crying. And we kind of go through a typical process when we read an impact letter. And we got to the part where we were going to ask her how she felt, what was going on for her. And the first words out of her mouth, and this was not unique to what I've seen these 20 years that I've been doing impact letters, her first response was, I can't believe what I put my parents through. And maybe because the story was particularly tragic and some of the behavior or incidences were particularly traumatic, it struck me more than ever where I sat there and I thought she missed the entire point of the impact letter. And yes, of course, parents are impacted by their children's behavior. They're impacted emotionally, they're impacted financially, they're impacted in terms of their emotional and their own physical resources. All of that is impacted. And that becomes part of the impact letter, part of what can inform a loved one, a child in this case. But the fact of the matter is, that's not what the impact letter is about. And we don't want this young girl believing that the most important message at the outset of her program is how she hurt her parents. We want her to understand that more than anything, she's failed herself. More than anything, she's dealing with wounds and symptoms and behaviors that are perpetuating trauma in her life. And so there's some healing that needs to happen. So with that story as a backdrop and with that observation that I've had this one time and many other times beside this, where I see how children respond to their impact letter, I want to talk to you about the guidelines. You will have an impact letter instruction. If you haven't already read it, you'll have an impact letter that instructs you about what to write. It takes you through a five-stage process, talking about describing the events that led to your decision to send your child. It talking about your emotional reaction to it, talking about what you hope for the program. What are your hopes? What are your outcomes that you're hoping for in the program? And then it talks about the things about the child that you admire and their positive traits. And then it has some other principles in there. So that is covered fairly well in the impact letter. But let me talk about some of the principles that really become or are a foundation of the impact letter writing. And the first is really me stealing from the name of a book by J&J, the author's J&J, a husband and wife team. And it is this idea of love first. that this intervention and this letter, which is sort of an ensign, it's emblematic of your love of this intervention, is really nested in love. Yes, there's hurt. Yes, there might be resentment and anger for the way you've been affected. But really, what it comes down to, what's at the core of it, is love. That you're sending your child here because you love them, you're worried about them, you're afraid of their quality of life, at least, if not their very life itself. And so it comes from a place of love. And it's important that they understand that. It's important that you understand at the outset that the goal of the impact letter, the outcome that we hope for from the impact letter, is for the child to reflect on self, to be able to look at, where am I? What's going on? Yes, my mom and dad were upset, and that's something, that tells me something. But what are the questions that I ask myself because of that? What are the things that I might need to look at that I haven't been looking at or evaluating as deeply as I can in my life? So it's important that we look at that outcome, that they look at their lives. We know this, and this is not new information to us as adults. We know that if we live our lives, even at our ages, if we live our lives to try to please anybody, even our parents, that we're going to live a life that is not totally complete and not totally full. We know that the goal of life is to find ourselves. We know that part of that means we have to let go of what other people think, peers, society, and sometimes even our family members, even those that love us. I'm sure all of you watching this webinar, whether tonight live or in the future, can come up with at least one thing that your parents or a loved one wants you to do or wants you to be that you're not willing to be because it's not a part of who you are. So it's very important that we understand that idea that we don't want to wire or program our children at Evoke. You don't want to wire or program your children at Evoke in such a way that they really take on the responsibility of what other people think. That they think that their life is about making other people feel good, making other people happy. And again, I'll say it one more time for a point of clarity and emphasis. When others that care about us, that love us, are concerned about us, that can inform us. But it cannot be the sole drive of our behavior. It can cause us to ask ourselves questions, but it needn't be the thing that we decide or reference all of our life's decisions on. And I'll talk about how we communicate that love as parents, as loved ones, later on in the webinar in such a way so as not to encourage our children to try to live up to our expectations or to believe that it's their job to make us happy. I say in the impact letter instructions, don't be careful. Be honest. I think at times I have found parents walking on eggshells. Be as honest and straightforward as you can. That, of course, is absent of sarcasm and belittling and name calling and bullying, but be as matter of fact as possible. Avoid the punitive ideas, concepts, skills of name calling, swearing, exaggerations, drama, and sarcasm. Because behind or underneath all of those behaviors or techniques are raw emotions, right? Vulnerable, raw emotions. And part of what we want to teach parents to do, right along with your children, is to find access and to communicate more vulnerably those feelings, to be willing to feel those feelings, knowing that when we are vulnerable, we can get hurt. We want you to be as specific as you can and tell stories. Even though your child was there when these things occurred, tell the story. Paint a picture for the group. You know, when we were at grandmother's house on the 4th of July, last year on your birthday, 2 weekends ago when we couldn't find you, this and this and this happened. So tell the stories as clearly and as objectively as you can. And when we get to the part about showing emotion, here's how we can do it so as not to encourage a kind of a shaming experience in our child, or to encourage an idea that it is their job to make us feel peaceful and unanxious or happy. And then the first one, like I was just saying, be vulnerable. Share your primary emotions. Primary emotions are hurt, scared, worried, sad, happy. Secondary emotions are anger, frustration, rage. You know, those feelings in the family of anger are secondary. They serve to protect us. They serve to protect our vulnerabilities in our heart. So share as honestly and vulnerably as you can those primary emotions, and then own it. This is mine. The way that I model this or try to demonstrate this, and when I'm talking to my children, this is what I aspire to, and on my good days I do it. I'll say, here's how I'm feeling about your behavior. I share my feelings with my children, not so that they will change to make me feel better, but so that I can be present, so that I can own it, so that I can get clear. And again, question or statements like that can inform them, but I don't want them to be driven by them because then I'm just creating a certain kind of susceptibility to peer pressure in their life that I don't want them to suffer through as much as I have, as much as many of us have. So I share my feelings. I own them. These are mine. You don't have to do anything to make me feel better, but I am scared. I am anxious. I am worried, and that's mine. And I might even at that point take a moment and say, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to decide a consequence or a limit, or I'm going to decide on what my reaction is going to be to this situation or to this behavior. But I own my emotions as myself, and I even, in my best moments, tell the other person, you're not responsible for it. It's about me. I need to look at this. I might need to take a timeout. Timeouts are so underrated and they're so wonderful. They get us out of our triggered and trauma responses to make a decision from the front part of our brain, the top part of our brain that can think rationally and can be clear. So I own my emotions. And then, like I said, I try to say it's not responsible. You're not, my serenity, my happiness, my ability to sleep at night is my responsibility. And yes, I love my children more than I could ever imagine that I could love somebody. Yes, I love my children. And fundamentally, I'm responsible for the peace, the serenity, the contentment, the clarity, the hope, the confidence in my life. My sleepless nights, my inability to get along with my wife, my inability to cope with it is mine. And yes, you might be doing some things that make it very, very difficult. That everybody I know might agree with that this kind of behavior is an incredible stressor on somebody who loves you, somebody who's your parent. That might be true, but it's still mine. Because if I get to blame you for my feelings, then you get to blame me for your feelings. And then we're stuck. And then none of us learn responsibility for ourselves. Don't blame or abdicate your decision. It doesn't matter where you are in this process. If you are in the process of sending a child, if you're in the process of deciding what the next step is for your child, if you're making smaller decisions along the way, it's important that we don't say, I had no other choice. You made me do this. But to say, I watched what was happening and this is what I chose. Sometimes I use language like, this is my best guess. I could be wrong, but this is my best guess. And whatever you need to do, mom and dad, whatever you need to be as clear as you need to be to make the decision, that's what you do. Studying, talking to experts or people that you trust, researching it out by talking to families or other parents or the programs themselves, praying, meditating, discussing it with your partner or co-parent or spouse. Any of those things that you do are yours. And then at the end of the day, you get to make the decision. And no expert therapist, no expert parent educator, no book is responsible for that. Ultimately, you are responsible for that. So own the decision. This is what I've decided. And you can be mad at me. And you can threaten never to forgive me. And you can say that you're going to hate me forever. And some of this is what you say in your head, not what you say in the letter or out loud. But it's that philosophy. You approach it with that mindset. You own the decision. Toward the end of the letter, this is one of the most important parts of the letter that reminds them that you're coming from a place of love, that doesn't paint them or their behavior with one color, with one broad stroke, but you talk about the things that you see that are their strengths. You talk about parts of them or experiences that you miss. You talk about your admiration for their qualities, and you talk about your hopes for them. And in most impact letter groups, letters that I've participated in groups where children have read them, this is where the children break down. This is the part that softens it. We list this in the order of steps in the impact letter instructions at the end, but this is something you can put in the middle or at the beginning also. I don't want you to do this to take away from the beginning. I don't want you to soften the impact. I don't want you to apologize for the honest concern that you have and the descriptions of their behavior. I don't want you to apologize and make up for any of that. But ideally, we want you to create this whole picture encapsulated in love. Less is more. I like less than 3 pages single space typed. Probably about 2 is the average that I like. Less than 2 starts to lean toward maybe not enough stories, maybe not enough expressing what's going on for you and your thoughts and feelings. Once we get over 2 and start getting over 3, it becomes repetitive. It becomes more about the parent expressing themselves. And I know this. I've written an impact letter to my child in the wilderness. And I've given these impact letter instructions now for almost 20 years. And it was a lot harder than I thought, so I have empathy for you. But this is the outcome is a great letter. That's one of the outcomes, I should say. But the other outcome is clarity. The other outcome is reflection. The other outcome, actually, this skill, this tool, I should say, becomes a tool to improve your skill about understanding, as I always say, your relationship first with yourself, second with your child, and lastly with your child's behavior. So I think it's a worthy exercise. It's a worthy tool for all of us. And then we can take that letter, use it in the group to set up the child, the student, the client in the group with his or her peers in such a way that we can take that experience from home and say, we're seeing some of the same things. Tell us about that. What was that about? You didn't tell us about this or that. And can you begin to be honest with yourself? Can you begin to develop the courage that it takes to look at yourself honestly? Because that is the first step of this program. And the impact letter is this reconciliation between what you've been telling us and what your parents' experience was back at home. And tell us about how you merge those two presentations, the presentation from your parent and from yourself. Do your best to steer clear of shame. This program is not built on shame and guilt. We believe, we experience, we observe from shame and guilt that most people tend to cover up, tend to hide, tend to want to walk away from therapy, right? The experience of shame is to look down, to not look somebody in the eyes, because I can't face the way that you see me, the way that I imagine that you see me. And so shame causes us to hide from healing. It's not a motivator for healing. Neither is guilt. Most children and parents have to learn at Evoke therapy programs to be able to tolerate guilt well enough that they can do the right thing. Sometimes guilt does motivate us in a morally enlightened direction, right? At least behaviorally speaking. But more often than that, we find people afraid to say no to their boyfriends, afraid to say no to their children, afraid to set a boundary with a partner or a friend because of a feeling of guilt, because it's upsetting you, because it's hurting you. So this is not about shame and guilt. And that's one of the things that we work both with children and parents, their parents, to try to address, eradicate, minimize. This program is not about you, mom and dad. Your program is about you. The discussions that we have are about you. The parent workshops, the webinars, the parent readings are about you. The parent skills that we teach, the letters that you write, and then the tools that are involved in those things are about you. But this impact letter in the end and what it does is not necessarily about you. And your child's program is about them. And just saying that, really, I want to highlight this idea that it's about having a healthier connection to your child and what's going on for them. And so that separation that I just orally described is towards the idea of, okay, this is theirs. And I love them and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be clear about it. I'm going to see it. I'm going to name it. I'm going to describe it. I'm going to describe my relationship to it. I might even from there begin to understand myself in a better way. But that thing is about them. And I'm going to do all that I can to be able to be present with it and see it and respond to it. But the impact letter, or at least the result of it, is not about you. Questions and statements. Be clear about your questions. This is some passive way that we communicate. I give examples where I think these questions are really statements and this statement is really a question. Don't you think you are making poor choices? More assertively said, that could be, I think that you are making poor choices. Don't you think if you hang around old friends, you'll fall back into old patterns? That would be more assertively said. I believe that if you hang around old friends, or it's been my experience that when I or others or you hang around old friends, that you are dragged down to the lowest common denominator. I think you did this because you were mad at me. Might be then followed up with, were you mad at me, or why did you do this? So we learn right from this first letter, we start to learn communication skills to become more clear. And folks, I'm telling you, The improvement in communication skills begins to change the way that we think, begins to change the way that we think about our relationship, and begins to improve our impact on our children and on others. Writing from your center spot, not trying to aim it with their reaction in mind. The example I use, because I love sports, is tennis or baseball. If you're a pitcher or a tennis player and you aim the ball, anyone who's tried it knows that you're going to lose accuracy. So you focus on your stroke, or you focus on your throwing motion, and you become a better tennis player. You become a better pitcher. And I'm sure it's true in all kinds of arts and all kinds of walks of life. We learn to let go. That doesn't mean that we don't try. That means that we focus on our intent, we focus on our delivery, we focus on our honesty, we focus on our accuracy, we focus on our skill set, our tools, all of those things. And then we release it. We turn it over. We start to tell the truth more. We start to tell it fearlessly, unapologetically, without cruelty, not for the purpose of hurting somebody else, but we start to tell it more accurately because we're not trying to control other people. So you learn in this letter, and this is the beginning, to speak from your center spot, from who you are. And that's part of what we're really providing for the entire family. You cannot decide the quality of this letter or any letter by the response that your child has, only by the intrinsic principles and intent. This is, again, an extraordinarily important principle at Evoke. It goes to the point of even sending them to Evoke therapy programs. That if you decide the rightness or the wrongness of it, based on solely their response to it, you're turning over your power. You're really measuring your ability to manipulate somebody. But if you constantly make your life, your practice about looking inward, getting honest with yourself, getting more clear, building tools and skills, all those things, you become much more effective and much more influential in a positive way to others. I know I use Star Wars metaphors, but I think about in the first Star Wars in 1978 or whenever it was, episode 4, I believe, A New Hope, where Obi-Wan Kenobi was first training Luke to put the mask on him, and he couldn't see. And he was fighting that little robot, right? That little flying little robot that was shooting sparks at him. And of course, that's a metaphor and it's science fiction. But he's trying to teach him to let go. He's trying to teach him to look inside, to feel. And that's really what George Lucas's message was through all of the movies. What we're talking about right here on this webinar. This idea of finding yourself, finding your flow, finding your truth, finding your authenticity, and then letting the outcome go. Versus the other side of it, which is try to control and to coerce and to force and to intimidate. That was Darth Vader's way. Forgive the analogy. More than one, you may have to be patient to increase focus and intensity. You might have to write more than one, not formal impact letter with the kind of depth and the kind of specificity of this first one, but you might have to write a letter that holds them accountable, that holds up a mirror more than one or two or more than a couple of weeks. So if your therapist asks you, hey, we're still seeing this, hold up the mirror in this way. Keep the letter short. Don't debate, don't argue, don't try to talk them into it. But tell them what you are and aren't going to respond to. And tell them what you're waiting for. I'm waiting to hear. I'm waiting to look. I'm not going to debate. I'm not going to respond to your requests. I think there's some things you need to look at, and I don't need to repeat them. Those kinds of statement, that kind of sentiment might be something you need to maintain for a few weeks. So this is kind of a do's and don'ts page. Don't work harder than your child. I see parents reading more than their children. I see parents making sacrifices more than their children. This isn't about a power struggle. This is saying there's work that you have to do. I always found, for me, the first quarter of the program, maybe a third of the program, I almost wanted to say to parents, just wait. Just relax for just a moment. We'll get to more of what you need to do, but this early part, don't overwork it. Just state your truth, state your message, and let the wilderness, let it work itself out. Because there's something that they need to do that we're waiting for. And we're not doing nothing, but we're holding up a mirror. We're blocking their escape routes emotionally, psychologically, even physically. We're immersing them in a culture of accountability, of love, of honesty, of courage. So don't work harder than your child. Let it unfold. It didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a little while. Try to avoid passiveness, sarcasm, and blaming. Blaming them. You made me feel. You made me do this. Life makes me do. Try to avoid those things so that you're beginning to change, to become healthier. You're modeling that, and because you're actually then impacting them in a positive way. You're saying, I'm going to do something different. This thing that you're going through, although I would have never chosen it in all of my life, it's going to now become a catalyst for me to do something different, for me to think about myself, my life, my relationship, my parenting differently. I usually like it, and your therapist toward the end of every week's phone call can talk to you about do's and don'ts in letters and what to write, what to focus on, what themes there are. I usually want parents to write at least one sentence, even if that sentence is after an abusive letter or after a letter that threatens you or after a letter that is repetitive or blaming, saying something along the lines of, I don't have a lot new to say this week. I'm looking forward to hear your response to my statements or to your therapist or to what's going on. One letter says, I'm here, I'm present, but I'm not gonna engage. I'm not gonna debate because you've lost when you debate. I'm not gonna prove it to you. I'm not gonna power struggle. I'm letting go. I'm stepping out of this old dance, this old pattern that we've been in. Don't teach or preach, and that I can't overstate. We will do the heavy lifting. We will do it because we have the advantage, because we're not their parent, right? Automatic advantage. The same way that you would have an advantage in talking to my children. The illustration that I like to use is when my very best friend and I were both new, young, married couples. We went out golfing with our wives. We learned extraordinarily quickly that I was allowed to teach his wife and coach his wife, and he was allowed to teach and coach my wife, but we were not allowed to say a word to our own wives. It didn't work because there are triggers there. And if you've ever tried anything like that, you know what I'm talking about. And it's the same with our children. There's this desire to maintain a sense of independence and individuality and autonomy in this process that a parent threatens, that an outsider doesn't. So not lecture. They know your lectures because we hear them give them to other people. They have them memorized. And in week 3 or 4, they're regurgitating lectures that they've heard all the adult authority figures in their lives give. And that's not what therapy and transformation is about. Is about being lectured at. So don't teach or preach. One-page letters, single space typed, and some people handwrite them and some people level space. But if you're looking about one page, 1.5 pages, that's about right on average. There might be a specific assignment or a specific objective that you're working with your Evoke therapist where you might expand that or reduce that, but that's about average. Learn how to listen. I will say this with no specific prejudice toward any one parent. I almost never meet a parent, let alone human being, right? I'll even put it that, who is really, really, really good at listening. It is an elusive skill and talent because we get triggered. We have our reactions. I'm very well trained at it, of course, and at times I can be pretty decent, but I still stumble. I still get triggered. I still get stuck. I still go into my own head. I'm still loading up my own responses, right? I'm still making meaning out of it, judgments out of it, making decisions from it without listening. It's okay to share your stories during the subsequent week. Share what's going on from you. I think one of the most helpful things that many parents will do is start to talk about the things that they're learning in their work through these webinars, through your phone calls, the letter writing, the therapy you're doing at home, the groups that you're attending at home, on and on and on. You start sharing your lessons and your struggle, your awareness of your limitations. It can become an incredibly inviting context for your child to respond to be in that kind of relationship. Borrowing from the book Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick, some great research about confrontation and what it means, and the old treatment center model of yelling and standing up and telling somebody what an idiot they are, and all of those old-fashioned ways of doing it. We know that that's not the most effective way to engage most people. That most of the time that provokes a defensiveness. It invites the defense. that they built to protect themselves from feeling hurt or being threatened. Confrontation is not yelling, anger, or self-centered. It must come from a place of love or client-centeredness to be trustworthy. That's a fundamental principle in this book, Motivational Interviewing. It's very similar. Some of you will have heard of or will hear of in the future the 7 challenges, which is oftentimes posited as an alternative to the 12 steps. I don't think that's accurate at all. It's a way of engaging a client in a non-confrontive, inviting way, a way that invites discussion, that steers away from power struggle. So it's very similar to that. When you take care of yourself through confrontation, right? When you do that, you're not necessarily meeting the client's needs. You're not responding to the child, to the partners for that matter. You're not responding to the other's needs. There are these reflection of me errors where what you're doing is a reflection of me. I never taught you that. Or even deeper than that, when you fail or succeed, I feel some sense of shame or pride, speaking respectively to those two issues. So we learn to separate, to take a step back and to say, my stuff is mine. My mistakes are mine. My skills are mine. My authenticity is mine. All of that is mine. And what is yours is what you do with it and what sense you make out of it. And I'm not going to lecture that to you. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to act like that's true. And the way that I act like that's true is I don't take it on. I don't react. It's not a knee-jerk reflex. I learn to hear what you say about me or how you react to me or what you do patiently. I learn to see you in your actions, not me. So we learn in this process, when we steer away from confrontation and taking care of ourselves in this context, we learn to see the other. Confrontation is pointing out inconsistencies. This is really the core of motivational interviewing and the 7 challenges. Confrontation is pointing out inconsistencies, faulty reasoning, pros and cons, and acknowledging their perspective. Right? It's inviting a kind of thinking that challenges some of the assumptions, some of the thinking errors. The book Addictive Thinking, that there is a webinar on, talks about this idea. Motivational interviewing talks about this idea. The 7 challenges talks about this idea. When I was being trained as a therapist, as a young therapist, the best supervisors I had wouldn't come in and start telling me what to do, because there's 1,000 right things you can be doing in any therapy session. And it's easy to point out 10 or 15 or 20 of those. But the most important thing is to pay attention to what was going on. So the best supervisors would come to me after a session or in the middle of a session. If they were watching me behind a one-way mirror on closed circuit TV, they would call me and say, what are you doing? What's your intention? And oftentimes, just through being asked that question, I would have some insight or some awareness. Or sometimes they would say, oh, you're trying to do this. Okay, it might work better if you try this way. Try approaching it from this perspective. So you start to ask intention, you start to ask questions, you start to be curious, you start to learn about the other, you start to listen. And then you can provide them with problem-solving ideas, concepts, and tools that help them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. Doing drugs, cutting on yourself, restricting food, promiscuous sex, lying, staying in your room, playing on the computer, all of those things serve a purpose. And we must first, as professionals, as parents, we must first listen to that language. Listen to the language of those symptoms and those behaviors. Understand it. I was asked in a TV interview recently this idea about how do you bring children out of the bedroom and into the family? And I didn't do well to answer it at the time. And as I thought about it later, the answer is you go into the bedroom, either literally or metaphorically, and say, what is it in here? What are they hiding from? And can I resonate with that? Can I understand that? And then from there, I can start to help them and myself build a way. But I've got to go in there before I build a way out of it. I've got to go into them literally or metaphorically before I help them come out of it. So going forward, as you go through this process in your life, through the program, don't argue, prove, debate, or justify your parenting decisions. That does not demonstrate strength. Justifying what you've done, explaining what you've done. I talked to experts. Brad said so on the webinar. I read this book. So and so. That doesn't demonstrate strength. That demonstrates insecurity and fear. A more powerful example or demonstration of security is, I'm doing the best I can and I could be wrong. This is my best guess. Yes, I've talked to professionals. Yes, I've done some research. But the fact of the matter, at the end of the day, this is my best attempt. And I could be wrong. You're right. You're right about all your accusations. or at least you could be right. Taking a we'll see attitude. I mean, this is this mentality I constantly talk about, where you say, "We'll see, we'll see." You're sorry, we'll see. You're gonna do better, we'll see. You'll never do this again, we'll see. You won't forgive me, we'll see. You're saying, I'm not going to make a decision based on what you say. I'm going to watch. Time is going to tell. I'm going to take a step back. It doesn't matter how much you threaten me, how much you promise, or how much you apologize. I didn't send you there. Anybody can memorize that. Anybody sincerely can feel that instinct to say those things. Anybody does and can. We've all said things in a moment where we believed it. I don't care if you're talking about committing to a new exercise program, right? A New Year's resolution, an apology to a partner, a spouse, a friend. We've all been sincere in those moments, felt it. But that's not what defines success. What defines success is the next morning after that, and the day after that, and the week, and the month, and the year after that. That's what defines us as successful. So taking a will see attitude consistently with our children. Don't overpraise. Overpraising is evidence of you believing that you have to inject self-esteem. Self-esteem comes from resonating with your children, seeing them, even their horrible, rotten symptoms. That's where self-esteem comes from, seeing them accurately. It does not come from praise. Praise oftentimes leads to insecurity. We know from the research. Read the book Nurture Shock. There's a few webinars on that where they talk about praise. It's this pseudo, it's this counterfeit way of trying to express affection, right? The image I have, or the metaphor that I borrow, is when I was in Little League, and if somebody in my family was clapping too hard from the sideline, cheering too hard from the sideline, I got distracted in the game. I wanted them there. I wanted them to be a part of the crowd. I didn't want to hear their voice singled out. I got to sort this out. And sometimes you have to strike out. Sometimes you're gonna struggle. You're gonna fail. When we praise children for their successes, or for their talents, or for their potential, they tend to choose easier tasks. They tend to cheat, and they tend to avoid difficult situations. When we praise effort, they tend to try harder tasks. They tend to try more challenging activities, and they tend to tolerate failure. So this idea that we have as parents, this really place that comes from our own anxiety, and further than that, it comes from our own childhood. To inject or create esteem by praise, it's misinformed. I was going to say misguided, but misinformed is probably correct. So read the chapter, watch the webinar on Nurture Shock if you're curious about that, the book Nurture Shock. But be careful of overpraising to try to compensate, apologize for, or soften the truth, your concern, or your feedback that they may be struggling or be off course. Similarly, avoid the phrase "I'm proud of you." I don't like to use it because there's this moral, or this piece of it that says you're making me happy or proud. I'm happy for you is what I like to say. It seems like you can be happy or proud of yourself. It looks like you're proud of yourself. I'm glad that you're experiencing success. It sounds great. Excuse me, it sounds great. But I'm proud of you makes it about me. It makes it about a reflection about me. So be careful. Be mindful of that statement. It's a preference of mine. Don't go too high or too low. The bad is not that bad, and the good is not that good in our program, in life for that matter. But because we as parents, because of our anxiety, because of our fears, because of our want to control, because of our inclination to avoid pain and fear and difficulty, all of us have it. We hold on tightly to the highs, and we absolutely dread and hold on too tightly to the lows. So take a step far enough back that you can see and even out those peaks and valleys. Don't send often the first thing that comes to your mind in a letter. Avoid the back and forth. Avoid the reactive, reflexive letter. I almost have never seen a letter that was written late on a Wednesday night, or whatever night you get your letters, that was sent to me overnight, that I had in my inbox and in my email the next morning. I almost never, I'm sure there were exceptions, saw one of those letters that I thought, this is a great letter. This is a letter that we ought to send to your child. That's going to be helpful for you and for them, for the relationship. It's okay to journal about it. It's okay to put a draft out there, but take a step back. Take a day. That's one of the gifts of our program, of all of our programs, is the distance that can create clarity and can improve a connection. You're going to learn about confrontation, about answering questions, about ignoring, understating, chatting, sharing personal anecdotes. Your therapist can guide you on that. You know, each week, be intentional on your side of things about what you want from your Evoke therapist in terms of guidance. You don't want to spend necessarily 55 minutes talking about your child and the update for the week. You want to spend time talking about you, your reaction. How do I respond? What's going on for me? What's the best way that I can help or facilitate or encourage change or improvement in my child? What's something I can do to practice self care? So you'll learn to do those things. Like I said early on in the webinar, I think if there were only one assignment, only one, it would be the impact letter that the child writes to you. And the reason I say that, like I said at the beginning, is because an impact letter back to mom and dad said, is assertive, is not blaming, does not abdicate responsibilities. I used to say there are two rules when I would give instructions to my students. There are two rules for the impact letter you write to your parents. Your choices, your decisions, your reactions to them are not their fault. So don't blame them. And they don't have to be bad or wrong. Just talk about how you felt, but own your reaction. So an impact letter back to you is, hey, mom and dad, I didn't like it when you yelled. Yes, I'm responsible for storming off. Yes, I'm responsible for skipping school. Yes, I'm accountable for how I dealt with my depression. All of those things are mine. I'm learning to take ownership. I'm learning how to improve those things. But I was hurt when you yelled. I was mad. I thought about this, imagine, and I want to do this, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I want to create a paper drawing of the average size parent with the average size 8-year-old, right? I'm going to put this 12-foot high picture of a human being that you and I have to walk up to and look at. That's what we are to them. We are giants. Even when they're teenagers or young adults, we're giants. You know when you go back to that place when you were young and everything looks smaller? Psychologically speaking, we have this experience with people in life that somehow they're the expert or they know more. And it starts off with our parents. And our parents aren't the experts. We're not the experts. We have some wisdom. We have some experience. Hopefully that's developed some compassion, understanding, and patience in us. We have some things to offer. Mostly we have a listening ear and hopefully the courage to make some difficult choices around boundaries and around limits and around taking care of everybody in the family, including ourselves. But it's important to understand how to have a relationship with your parent. And the impact letter back to you is a fantastic one. When to forgive and move on? Not too quickly. And when you're ready. And it's important to move through your anger, your hurt, your frustration, to own it, it's yours, but to move through it in your own time. And if you're stuck to the point where it's becoming a barrier for you to grow, it's becoming a barrier because you're trying to protect yourself from getting hurt again, which you most likely will be with your child or with anybody that you love, then it's time for a therapist or a sponsor or somebody to step in and say, I think this is about you. I think we're at the point now where you're afraid to get hurt and you're protecting yourself. But that's a sophisticated, complex process, which is best understood in the context of your child and a professional or a mentor that you might be talking with. So, all right, folks, I'm happy to take any questions, some live questions before we close the meeting. So, no questions so far. I will go through, Stephanie. I'll come back to this, but I'll go through things. Here's my book on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. You can find it there. We have our Entrada workshop that we're still scheduling. The next family intensive, excuse me, it should say parent intensive. Parent intensive. That can be individual parents or couples. Will be May 28th through 31st. I'll be hosting that. You can contact Stephanie at evoketherapy.com for more information or go right to the site, our website, to find out more. I can't say enough about what I believe this can do for families. Here's our upcoming parent. We have 2 pages of parent support groups coming up. Austin, Texas. I'll be there this Friday night. Costa Mesa is happening tonight, actually, right now as we speak. So you're not listening to this if you're there, if you could go there. Los Angeles will be tomorrow night. Marin County will be mid-May. And then I have an East Coast trip that I'm making. Philadelphia, June 11th. Sunday, June 14th, will be in Boston. And New York City on June 15th. So that's what's coming up on the East Coast. We want you to go to 6 of these parent support or these support groups, excuse me, while your child is with us at Evoke. Please follow us on social media for updates, for stories, for announcements. Please follow us if you use social media, Twitter, Facebook. You can go to our blog. We're really turning out a lot of blogs. Our staff and our therapists are on fire, passionate about this right now. Go to our Parent Alumni Foundation page to order books from there. And our next one, we have two. I'm announcing two. So on Monday, I'm going to do an open forum. And then on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, that's a unique time, we're going to be doing one dedicated to siblings and where siblings are invited. So bring your children on, invite your children that aren't living at home to come on, let your children that are older come on by themselves. I'll be answering their questions. Please send in questions in advance, have them send questions. And then if parents are asking questions about sibling, I'll be answering and modeling those answers for parents. So, all right, Stephanie, I'm happy to go to any questions if you have any that have come in. No questions. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for joining us. I hope this midweek contact, is that supposed to be May? I'm sorry. That is supposed to be May. Thank you. That is Monday. No, that's June 4th. Is that May? Oh, we're in April. I had a brain freeze there. Yeah, that is May 4th and May 5th, Monday and Tuesday of next week. I apologize for that. Thanks for catching that. I hope these points of contact are helpful. I will talk to you on Monday and Tuesday night, and your siblings, if you'd like them to, please send them the information in advance. Have a great evening. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.